Oh, I just thought this wasn't going to work. It just wasn't going live. Which I think it's because it's busy airways. Because it's New Year's Eve. I'm wishing all a very happy 2022 in case I forget afterwards. I've had a busy day, but I thought I'd get a little chapter in before the new year starts. I'm reading BLISS Afterlife, which is a story I started writing in 2006, so it's 15 years ago. I don't know when I wrote all these chapters exactly. I think I marked the date when I was writing in the latter chapters, but I haven't done this when I was traveling. I just did it whenever I felt like writing and when the muse kissed me. Chapter 48, BLISS Afterlife, the story about a reincarnation. Bliss passed away at 95, one day after her birthday party, which is a little while ago here. Chapter 48, Rosie and Isabel. Rosie and Isabel had been cleaning the refuge. It was to be a surprise for Susan. It really needed a bit of attention, and as they were set to move out in 10 days, they wanted to help as much as they could. Ben and his new girlfriend Faye were expected at some point over the weekend, and they knew Suzanne had enough to do over the next few days. They had a new resident in the refuge, Anna. She had come on her own a couple of nights ago. In her mid-20s, she had come over from Russia a while ago. No one yet really knew her story, but she had looked terrible when she opened the door after insistent ringing late in the evening a few days ago. She had escaped from somewhere. Susan had taken her in her office, and they were still in there when Rosie and Isabel had gone to bed. Anna had moved into the back room, the smallest in the house, but as they were leaving soon, she would probably switch later on into a larger room. "What do you think her story is?" Rosie asked Isabel. "Well, she's from Russia, that much we heard, and that she escaped from somewhere. Gosh, I wonder if that's one of these people trafficking rackets you hear about. Imagine. Let's wait, Isabel. Typical of you to make a Martina Cole novel out of it." The author was well loved in the house, generally by the teenage residents, who were mostly too young to read them, and therefore did. Almost all her novels are full of horrendous stories of survival amidst prostitution and crime. Well, you do hear a lot about such things nowadays. It's not so unbelievable. Anyhow, we will no doubt hear. She seems very shy and withdrawn, though. Suspicious? What do you mean suspicious? Honestly, Rose. You really come up with quick judgments. We saw her twice, briefly, since she arrived. Yesterday she spent ages in the garden. She seemed quite calm to me. Suspicious? What do you mean, anyway? She looked at us with suspicion? Well, if your idea is true, then she probably isn't. That it's probably no surprise that she's careful with people. I don't suppose she knew what would happen to her. She did not look very good the other night, did she? Certainly had been battered about a bit, bruise under the eye, and she looked really dishevelled. Anyhow, let's be nice to her. Remember what it felt like when you arrived? Oh, okay, you're right, of course. Always too quick to judge, I am. Let's get a move on with finishing the bloody hoovering now, and then you can sort the kitchen. Most of it is done. The children did all the washing up this morning. Chapter 49. Anna. Anna loved being outside in the garden. The sun was pale and looked milky. It was quite cold, and really, it looked a little forlorn. But not to Anna. She sat herself on a small bench at the very back of the garden. What had happened to her? She felt a wave of gratefulness washing over her to have found this place. She had seen an article about this place in one of the newspapers, which had been stuck over the window in the horrible little room she had been staying. She had been locked up. It had been an incredible month. She was born in Russia. Her father was English and her mother was from St. Petersburg. They lived just outside Moscow, and Anna was one of 3 children. She had not lived at home the last 3 years. After university, she moved out and worked in Moscow as a croupier in a fancy nightclub. She thought about how she loved all the high life. Her parents were very conventional. Her dad was English, which gave her a second language so easily, because he did converse with her in English. He had come over to Russia when he was 18 and a student. He had always been fascinated with Russia. He could never really explain why, but he arrived for a 4-week working holiday and never went back to England. That was quite unusual, she thought, but it was something she grew up with. He had met Ludmilla, Anna's mum, and they fell in love all those years ago. To her they were boring and small-minded, and she had left home as soon as she had found a well-paid job. It was not really what her parents had in mind for her. She had studied English and they were hoping she would become a teacher, but for Anna that sounded far too uninteresting. Moscow was the place to be, and the nightclubs were to her the height of all things she admired. Designer clothes were the norm, and the way people gambled their money away as it was nothing. She had rented a small room in a shared apartment in the center of Moscow, and she was out all the time, either at work or with friends, drinking and partying, and she had also been experimenting with drugs, cocaine mainly. Everybody seemed to do it. She sat on the bench and hugged herself. Vladimir had promised her a fantastic job in a London nightclub. He had organized a visa for her and 2 other girls, much younger than Anna, as she later found out. When they got to London, he took all their passports and any money he could find. He put them up in a small room and locked the door. He would give them heroin and some food, but otherwise they were locked up until he could find them some work. To Anna, it seemed that he himself had not worked this out properly. 2 nights ago he came with 4 men. He had told the girls to look nice as they were going out, but it had become quite clear from the beginning what the plan was. Inside her room, her 2 companions were different to Natalie. They did not seem so shocked, and as long as they had their drugs and drinks and the prospect of a job, they seemed to have accepted their position. She had decided quite early, or when it transpired, that she'd been a fool to take charge whenever she had the slightest chance. There was no way Anna was going to stay. She had dressed nicely in the afternoon, but she was prepared. When the men arrived, she went to the toilet, grabbed her small case, which she had never really unpacked, and had hidden in the cupboard, and left in a hurry. She knew if Vladimir would catch her, he would make sure she paid for this. She had felt the back of his hand only a few days ago when she was arguing about the whole situation. He had scared them all with his sudden violence. The old page of the newspaper describing the suicide of a young girl in a local women's rescue mentioned the name of a road. Anna happened to remember the name when she came here, and she decided to try and find a place to stay at least for a few days. She felt suddenly that she could manage to get herself out of this mess, if only she could manage to get away from drugs, drinks, and easy money, which was not easy at all. It was so quiet here in the garden. The birds were singing, despite the cold. There was a bird feeder, a few of these little fat balls birds love. She sat quite still and watched the little red robin. He seemed to watch her whilst she looked at him. He pecked at the food and kept looking into her eyes. How lovely, she thought, these birds always were here, chirping and feeding, when she was locked in that little horrid room, feeling all desperate and depressed. I see you, little bird, I'm so glad I see you, she whispered. I shall ask if I can make a vegetable garden here. Maybe I can offer my services for lodging, she mused. Her mum and dad had always had a vegetable patch at their little dacha outside Moscow. They were not wealthy, but that was always a misconception of people. That only rich Russians had a dacha. In fact, the concept of a little place where you can grow your own vegetables and have a simple house, small house, was a common thing in Russia. People think so differently of us Russians, she thought. Well, probably somewhat justifiably occasionally. After all, she grew up in the new Russia, and she had wanted all the wrong things. Glamour, money, designer clothes. When she thought back her attitude, she felt ashamed. Where did it get her? She was stranded. She did feel lucky to be here, rather than in that little room where the other 2 girls continued on the path of self-destruction. Suzanne had been so kind to her, had not asked many questions, but she was sitting so quietly it did not take much for Anna to pour it all out. She cried and felt so rotten, disappointing her parents, herself, all the people who cared about her. She had been so scared, had suppressed it all these last few weeks. Susan had shown her the small room, which felt immediately peaceful, small but really lovely and sunny. She had had a bath and fell asleep immediately, feeling safe and secure for the first time in a long while. She didn't feel too good at the moment. Her mind kept straying to the need for some of the drugs, but she steeled herself. Thankfully, she had not taken the heroin for more than once or twice, and she will not let herself be allowing to need it more than she needed to get her life together again. She got up to go back to the house. There were more people in the kitchen, and she felt she needed to join in a little. She felt quite afraid. What must they think of her? If her mother had seen her when she arrived here, she had felt dirty and unkempt. Anyhow, she had clean clothes on now and felt good after her night's sleep. Deep inside her, she felt, with some help, she will get back to the way she used to be. She needed to distract herself, fill the hole the heroin seemed to have created after the couple of times she'd been given it. Chapter 49. Welcome at the Refuge. Anna walked into the kitchen. It was a real bustle in there. Susan had just returned and had noticed how wonderfully clean everything looked. Rosie and Isabel had really put the finishing touches on everything by getting some flowers, and it smelled of coffee and cakes. There was also quite a few more people in the hall waiting to come in, and she almost turned around to go back into the garden. Anna, please stay. Meet my son Ben and his girlfriend Faye. Susan had just noticed Anna and drew her into the room. Ben, Faye, this is Anna, a new resident in the house. She's Russian and has only been here a few days. Everything is still new to her, except the garden, which seems to be her favorite place. Hello, very nice to meet you. Yes, I love the garden. So peaceful. And you have lovely little corners where one can sit and just watch the birds. I hear this is the first time you are in England, Faye. Me too. Yes, and I love it all. Although I've not seen much yet, I'm enjoying myself very much. I would love to have a look at the garden. We have a lovely garden in China at my parents' house. My mum grows vegetables and herbs, and flowers, of course. Ah, same as mine. I do think it's a lovely thing to do, although I only seem to have discovered this in the last few days. She smiled at Faye. They liked each other straight away. Both were about the same age, and both felt a little out of place in the family togetherness. Go, by all means, have a look around with Anna, Faye. I shall make some more coffee and tea, and we will disperse the crowd a bit. We will have the house full. Ooh, but I'm so pleased to have all of you here. Susan felt again like crying. What was the matter with her, she thought. Faye was glad to have a little respite from the noise and the crowd. She walked outside with Anna, and the stillness really struck her. You wouldn't think we are in a big city here, would you? She asked Anna. No, I have been spending some time here, thinking. I have a lot to think about. I think I made a few big mistakes. Anna smiled wryly and sat herself on the small bench she had earlier occupied. Faye sat down next to her. We all make mistakes, she said. I don't know, but it seems to me you did the right thing in coming here. You look as if you could do with a rest. Sorry, I hope I'm not offending you. No, don't worry, it's nice to sit and talk like normal people. Anna felt she could talk to Faye. She didn't really know why. Generally, she was much more of a closed person, and the last few weeks she had hardly spoken at all. Faye seemed very compassionate, without seeming in the slightest bit nosy. Why Anna was here, still with a faint bruise under her eye. Ooh! Faye held her belly. I just felt a little kick. She laughed. Oh, how does that feel like? Anna asked. She had noticed the small belly on Faye. She was happy for her. She couldn't imagine being pregnant at this moment. It was the last thing on her mind. She had to sort herself out first. She still felt very drained. Thankfully, she had not really taken too much of the stuff, a drag from a joint here and there, which seemed to be constantly being smoked by either one of the other girls, but otherwise she had stayed well away from the other stuff, except when Vladimir injected her a couple of times with heroin. Not that she hadn't been tempted to take more soon, but she had realized quite quickly that she had totally misjudged Vladimir, and although she had been a fool, she was not going to let them get her, dependent on anything which would prevent her from leaving. She had been that intelligent at least. What are you frowning about? Faye laughed. It's not a bad thing. In fact, once you recognize what it is, and I didn't when it first started, I thought it was a gurgling stomach or a tiny butterfly inside. Now it actually feels like a small kick. I expect there's worse to come. She laughed again. Oh, I'm not frowning about that. No, I'm sure it's lovely. One day I hope to have a baby too. but at the moment I have to cope with my present situation. Hence the frown. Although I'm now in a better place than I have been for a few weeks, I actually escaped from some pretty nasty people. Now she laughed. It sounded so like a cheap novel. Now you are frowning, Anna said. Escaped? That sounds horrible. I thought you might have some troubles. I'm glad you're here too. We're both new faces, foreigners at that. Yes, Anna said, although my dad is English. Mind you, he has lived in Russia for such a long time that I sometimes think he has forgotten. Although no, that's not true. He still loved his newspapers, Russian or English, and he speaks about England often. That's why I thought I would have a good time here. Actually, my story is quite simple. I trusted someone who was going to help me to get a job here in England, and it turns out he wanted to sell me to other men as a prostitute. Basically, that's it. Anna laughed, sounding not very cheerful. She blushed. Hey, you're here now. I'm sure everyone here is pleased to help, and I hope the wounds are not too deep. She put her arm around Anna. Thanks, Faye. That's very nice. You're making me cry. I've been such an idiot. Not only with this last decision I made, I've really not been very considerate to myself or my family. I've not felt as safe and happy as this for a long time. And it's my fault, really. Far too attracted to the dazzling lights. That's me. Time to turn a new leaf. Do you think Susan let me do a couple of raised beds for vegetables here? I don't know her that well yet, but I can't imagine that she would object. After all, it will produce some good food, and she always has so many to feed. My parents grow most of their own vegetables at home. I think I never realized how spoiled I was. Eating only organic, homegrown vegetables, I only realized when I was in the States that not all veggies tasted like the ones at home. It sounds a great idea to me. I hope so. You're so right about the taste. How did you meet Ben? They sat down on the little bench in the back to talk. And that's chapter 49, the last chapter of 2021. And I shall continue in 2022. I'm wishing all a very happy evening. Enjoy.